Thanks for joining us at this Magellan Portfolio Update. Today I'm speaking with Hamish Douglas, our Portfolio Manager and Chief Executive. Hamish, you've often commented on some of the gyrations going on in the European debt crisis. What are some of your latest observations?
Well, Frank, on the European debt crisis, we still remain confident that we're not going to see a financial Armageddon event in Greece. We are not going to see a total implosion and a depression through a collapse of the European financial system, and that's a big risk we've been worried about. But it is a situation of two steps forward and one step backwards at the moment. The steps forward, of course, is the new terms of the bailout that have been agreed by the finance ministers, not yet implemented. And really they're aimed at the right issues. They're not at the end point at the moment. Around Greece, we believe they do have the tools now to deal with a Greek default issue in our view of what's been agreed. They are addressing bank recapitalisation, maybe not to the full extent that's required, but they understand that issue and that problem of writing down sovereign credit and the impact it would have on bank capital. And importantly, they've now recognised the problem in contagion of other nations in Europe, particularly Spain and Italy, and the problem of rising bond yields. And they have announced a proposal, even though we don't know the details, about leveraging up the bailout mechanism to €1 trillion, really involving the private sector in leveraging that up. We actually don't think that's the end point of the answer. It may not be of sufficient scale, and we're not convinced, and we haven't seen the details, so we'll be better informed when we see the details. But we suspect this special purpose vehicle ultimately will need to have a banking licence to really unleash what's known as a bazooka to deal with that risk. But they're fundamentally addressing the right issues in our view. The big step backwards, of course, is the announcement by the Greek Prime Minister that he's going to hold a referendum on whether or not they should accept the terms of the bailout for Greece.
Hamish, what is your take on the Greek government calling for a referendum?
Well, like most people in the world, that certainly took me by surprise, that decision. I suspect there is more than meets the eye to the decision to announce. It doesn't make very much sense to put an issue like this to the public to vote on. It is very difficult for the public going through austerity to actually come to a rational decision about whether it's not actually in their interest to be bailed out or not while there's so much pain going on in the economy. So I think it's a very difficult referendum. I think referendums are almost impossible in the best of times, but I think they're very difficult. And I think he would realise that, and I think this is why people have been so shocked. But it may not be as simple as having a referendum and calling a democratic process on this. There may be more than meets the eye here. It may be a lot to do with domestic politics and calling effectively a confidence vote, and really we may never get to a referendum. Or it could be calling the Europeans bluffs about how far they're prepared to go, either on private sector write-offs, which are at 50%, which of course is only the private sector. The sovereign investors in Greece are not taking any haircuts whatsoever. So Greece may be angling for a larger debt forgiveness with these tactics, or they may be sending a signal is, I think you've gone far enough in pushing our economy to the brink here of further cuts. So it could be a bargaining tool Papandreou's using here. It isn't that clear exactly what's going on. As I said, it's taken me surprised. It has certainly spooked some people. I suspect it's not going to be the event that's going to unravel the direction this is heading with. It's certainly a step back from confidence, and I'm not professing I fully understand the reasons why it has been done, but I think there is more than meets the eye here, and it's not causing us undue stress at this point.
Are you seeing any clearer signposts coming out of the US economy?
Yeah, well, on the US economy, Frank, I think we've been quite consistent on this on this point. In the absence of a financial Armageddon event in Europe, we really do not see the double dip scenario in the United States. But nor do we see a sharp acceleration scenario in the United States in the short term. You need to understand that the US is in a 60-year depression in their housing sector. Private sector investment into real estate is running at a 60-year low as a percentage of GDP at the moment, and housing starts are at almost all-time record lows for multi-decade lows, and housing starts are running at 1/3 of their natural level of household formation at the moment. And it isn't until the housing sector starts to recover from a construction point of view that you're really going to see any pickup in the US economy beyond the sort of 1.5% to 2% growth rate that they may be achieving at the moment. So we're certainly seeing some signals that maybe the double dip recession isn't going to happen, but we really didn't think it was going to happen. We thought some of the early statistics were related to confidence around Europe and some supply issues coming out of Japan, and it's not surprising why you saw a dip a quarter ago. But I think we're now getting back to that muddle through economic scenario, and we don't see housing recovering maybe for another 3 years. And when it does recover, the US will start to get a more typical economic recovery coming out of a recession, but we'll almost be 7 to 8 years into this cycle. But then it creates opportunities, Frank. If we're right that they can have a much stronger economic recovery associated with housing 3 years out from now, but muddle through from today, that creates some pretty interesting investment opportunities, and certainly in our sweet spot from a time horizon perspective.
And Hamish, you're currently holding pretty low levels of cash.
Yeah, we are holding low levels of cash, and which is somewhat unusual for us at Magellan, particularly with the uncertainty that's been going on in Europe. We have tended to increase our cash weightings during periods of great uncertainty, and we decided from 1st of May this year not to increase our cash weightings. We did a few other things in the portfolio about how we run risk within the portfolio and which currencies we may have been exposed to during this period, and the performance of the fund I think has been pretty solid during that period. But because we don't believe Europe is going to collapse, and ultimately the regulators are going to get through a package of proposals that are going to address the Armageddon risk, this isn't a period in which we actually wanted to be in cash, because when that turns and markets have been sold down, it could be a pretty unpleasant place to be and very difficult to pick that turning point. So we've made a very clear call around about Europe, and on the back of that call we made a decision to remain pretty fully invested at the moment, and so far we remain very comfortable with that call. We're not saying Europe's about to recover. Europe has got a very ugly decade ahead of it in aggregate, but it's not going to have a depression in our view as a result of this current crisis.
Thanks, Hamish.
Pleasure, Frank.
And thank you for your ongoing interest and support.